Mayorkas vote just failed, and so did the Clean Israel bill. Good. Good. Israel aid failed. Good. Did they really think, I'm sorry, did those schmucks really think that they were going to stop this deal going through, the immigration deal, and then the Senate and the Democrats would just let the Republicans pass Israel aid independently? Fuck you. Why? Why would they? Veto it? Veto it again? Veto it a third time? Veto it a fourth time? President Biden should, on national television, take that Ukraine, the Israel aid bill, stuff it like a handkerchief around his neck, and then have a nice juicy steak, unedited, broadcasted into every house in America. What do you mean you're gonna try to pass an Israel aid bill after trying to stop the immigration Ukraine deal? Of course it's gonna get shot down. And if it succeeded in the House, it was gonna get shot down in the Senate. And if it by some miracle succeeded in the Senate, it'd be shot down by the president. And you want to know what the Republicans are doing now? And I saw it this morning. They're preparing to try to do a full court push to be like, oh my God, the Democrats stopped Israel aid. They hate Israel. Nobody's gonna fall for this shit. Nobody's falling for that nonsense. Get out of here. Heck W, Republicans will? Well, they're not voting for Biden anyway. I just don't think it'll have an effect. Like, Biden has actively already sent aid to Israel, and Biden has been trying to get more aid to Israel through the big $118 billion deal. I want the aid separated. I think they're two separate issues. They can be voted on separately. But it's not like Biden is trying to leave Israel up creek or abandon them or leave them alone. He wants to send them support anyway. Stuff that I disagree with, by the way. But claiming that he doesn't like Israel because you sunk the deal that you asked for and then tried to get all your priorities through with no compromise while controlling one chamber, yeah, of course it lost. Spicy takes today. This isn't a spicy take. I'm sorry. Let me retell the period of events. Can we see the, do we got anything on the Republicans, Israel? Do we have it getting killed? But okay, look. The House GOP and the GOP asked if they're going to pass Ukraine aid back in September of last year. This is how long this has been going on, when Kevin McCarthy was still House Speaker, by the way. They separate Ukraine aid from the budget. And then the Republicans say, well, we want to do this after Kevin McCarthy gets shot, and they go through a bunch of different House speakers and finally get to Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson says, no, we still support Ukraine. But if we were going to support Ukraine, you need to give more funding to the border. He's like, okay, we're going to include funding to the border. It's like, well, funding for the border isn't enough. There has to be policy changes. There has to be concrete policy changes. And he's like, okay. Then they negotiate in the Senate for 3 to 4 months as they leverage this national security priority. Then election season comes around, and by the time they finish negotiations, Donald Trump is looking at it saying, oh my gosh, if we have a deal on immigration, that could undercut my campaign message. That could make it harder for me to win if Americans think that Biden actually found a solution to the problem. Or if Biden possibly could get any positive attention from making a deal. So Trump sets out to sink it, and he succeeds. And Mike Johnson signs on to sinking that deal. And so the deal sinks. The deal that included Ukraine aid, Israel aid, Taiwan aid, and of course, border issues, border funding, border reform. Much of the border reform being Republican priorities that they've asked for more than a decade, that Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham said if they gave up, they'd be missing out on an opportunity because the Democrats will not offer this again. And let me say, they will not offer this again. But they sink the deal anyway because all hail mighty Trump. Trump over the Constitution. When he called for the suspending of the Constitution, they were able to overlook that. Trump over, back the blue when January 6th happened and all the violence happened and Trump did nothing to support the police officers. They're able to overlook that. Able to overlook all those things. All hail Trump. And now the plan is that after doing that, after betraying Ukraine that way, after he said he wouldn't, after sinking this deal, after months of negotiations, after requesting everything in this deal, and Democrats give you basically everything that you want outside of H.R. 2, which is a non-starter, and then you plan to pass Israel aid in a separate package around it, of course it was going to get sunk. Of course it failed. It was never going to work. If the Democrats would vote that through, if the Democrats would have voted that through, then I would genuinely be asking for them to check the lead paint percentages within the Capitol building. So thank goodness it didn't even get out of the House. So now they're stuck. If they're going to leverage Ukraine aid, then it seems like Democrats are in a position where they're now going to leverage Israel aid. My goodness. And I hope they do it. I hope they hold on to it. Because it's not like Israel is on the brink of their capital falling. Or oh my gosh, if we don't give Israel another 100,000 artillery shells that could be used in Ukraine, by the way, Hamas is going to charge back into Tel Aviv, where the Ukrainians are actually the ones holding the front against what was supposedly the second most powerful military in the world and the largest war in Europe since World War II, which is much more artillery intensive. But yeah, I think Biden should leverage it. I think they should sink it, and they shouldn't allow any more aid to get through. But the problem is with Biden. This is the problem. Biden also genuinely supports Israel. And so if Israel is in a position where they're like, oh, we really need aid, we really need aid, I could see Biden be like, oh, well, you know, part of my negotiations, man, but I'll give you another 500 million in this deal, or I'll use this emergency provision to give you that. And he has been doing that. But because he keeps doing that, that's going to undercut the leverage. That undercuts the leverage of the negotiations. I understand that he wants to keep a good relationship with our allies, but if we really want to get that Ukraine aid through, and we all realize how important it is, like, you got to go after Republican priorities. You have to make clear that Mike Johnson might sit over a House majority that abandons not only Ukraine, but Israel as well. And then he'll be seen as the Christian leader who abandoned the kingdom of God. And then they should run those ads. Mike Johnson abandoning Israel? Mike Johnson? Hamas Johnson? They should run those ads. Look, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get my point. Why can't he executive order Ukraine, though? This is the problem with executive orders, is executive orders have melted people's like knowledge of American politics. Executive orders only work in a very small area for the president to be able to use that authority. The president cannot executive order everything. The president cannot like executive order a $15 minimum wage increase. President cannot like executive order Medicare for all. President can't executive order all those things. President does have the power to support Ukraine through other means. One of the ways they can do it is up to $500 million the president can send what's in our reserves of our old stockpiles. So not new stockpiles, but old stockpiles. We can send up to a value of 500 million overseas to our allies. Now, the great thing about this, though, and it's a loophole, and it should probably be plugged, is you can determine how much any item you send overseas is worth. And so the Biden administration has used this loophole to send Bradleys and other equipment to Greece under the assumption that the Greeks will then send some of their older reserves, their BTRs and stuff, when even though I wish the Bradleys were going to Ukraine directly, they're going to send those over to Ukraine. Now, these are all stopgaps. And that still isn't dealing with the main issue of the shell shortage, right? But it is something. And he should be pulling every string he can right now, because the Battle of Avdiivka, I'm going to be honest with you guys, the situation's looking very bad right now. The Russians have entered the city. They're now fighting street by street, room by room. And the Ukrainians, starved of fresh reserves, but also starved of ammunition that could be sent, that we could have sent, that we could have agreed to send back in fucking September. They're starved of ammunition. And so the 110th and a bunch of other military formations are sending everybody they can to try to hold the line, try to hold the Russians back, maybe try to push them out back into the outskirts. But I mean, I've heard reports of them giving the engineers AK-74s and telling them to hold positions. So, I mean, it's street by street, room by room fighting right now in Avdiivka. When, if they had more ammunition, that valley of death, which was the northern advance into Avdiivka, could have been hammered so much harder. There are targets that the Ukrainians have in Avdiivka, and they watch them walk by. You know how frustrating that must be if you're a soldier and you train for like 3, 4, 5 months. You learn everything you can, and you get out there and you're fighting for your survival. And you've been sent here to try to liberate your home in Donetsk. And then you see the enemy that you've been training to get ready to fight for months and months and months. And then your commander says, don't open fire. We don't have the ammunition. We'll open fire on every 5th target, maybe every 2nd target if we're lucky and we get some extra ammo. Yeah, if you create these conditions for Ukraine, the chances of success do certainly go down. And the chances of them being in a good negotiating position certainly go down as well. It's an impossible position to imagine people are in. And can I just say, I did point this out, but American Armor is saving lives with Avdiivka. Where our support is in Avdiivka, when we do have support in Avdiivka, it is significantly helping. Let me show you for an example. This is a footage of an American-made M2A2 Bradley IFV fighting down in Avdiivka, down the streets. This is like right at the entrance of Avdiivka. So when I say the Russians have entered, this like they've entered right out on the outskirts. This Bradley hits an anti-tank mine, continues to operate, continues to fire at the enemy before, after the track unwinds, they retreat back, with both operators being able to retreat to safety alive. One second, I think you can see them run away here. Yep, they're making a run for it. Now, obviously, it sucks that this thing got disabled, but I do want to throw something out there. If this was a BTR, those two soldiers, good chance they'd be dead. The BTRs are like tin cans compared to the Bradley. The Bradley, much more modern, much better defense systems, much better armor, not to mention much better gun stabilization, bunch of other things as well. But it's much better at protecting soldiers. And I'm not just saying this. If you ask the soldiers who operate the Bradley, or you ask soldiers that operate old Soviet BTRs, they will say, of course we want a fucking Bradley. So where our equipment is in Ukraine, it's not like people pretend that we're just like dumping all this equipment down the drain. That machine just saved 2 lives of experienced IFV operators. Ukraine faces a manpower disadvantage. This is the exact issues that we should be helping Ukrainians with, protecting their manpower, especially their valuable manpower, their manpower that has experience in operating this type of equipment. So when we do help, it does significantly help. But if we do nothing, then we can't be surprised when we have no effect on the outcome. And Ukrainians operating a lot of artillery guns that need NATO standard 155 millimeter shells, which we've given them those artillery guns. They need those shells in order to operate them. They're becoming less and less useful. And eventually, if they don't get the shells, it'll just be a useless hunk of metal. And you want to talk about throwing something down the drain? If you give somebody a gun with no ammunition, well, that's fucking worthless, isn't it? Not saying we particularly gave them a lot of artillery guns. We gave them around, as somebody put out in site chat, around 100. I think a little bit over 100, like 116 or something. How come the Europeans aren't picking up the slack in terms of 155 shells? Well, the Europeans have already said that they are not going to be able to hit the shell production rate in order to get Ukraine the 1 million shells they promised them by March of this year. They said straight up, we will be able to give you half. So already, the Europeans have kind of failed the Ukrainians in what they committed to do. But what the Europeans are now saying is that by the end of this year, maybe not the end of last year, but the end of this year, they will be producing like 1.4 million 155 millimeter shells a year. And they're going to send 1.1 million. I guess the 0.1 is to make up for the loss of 500,000. But let me just say, 500,000 is a much different number than 100,000. 500,000 is the amount of shells that the South Koreans sent Ukraine, and were very helpful in the counteroffensive. So hopefully they're right that this year they'll be able to actually produce those many shells and get them over to Ukraine. But that means them matching that means them really expanding their ammunition production, which, I mean, they have their estimates about when they'll be able to do it, but we'll find out when they do it, or if they can do it. They attempt to. I know we sent other stuff like javelins, but man, if we just sent double the HIMARS and Bradleys, well, the thing is, the Bradleys don't have an ammunition shortage, so that won't be an amp problem for them. But the HIMARS, it's not just giving them HIMARS. We can give them like 100 HIMARS, but if we give them no ammo, it means nothing. And so we need to give them the ammunition for the HIMARS. And we seem to have designed some new weapons for the HIMARS to use, specifically in Ukraine, that we're shipping over now. Longer range rockets and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's going to have to come with more ammunition for the HIMARS, which means more production for that ammunition. So yes, I do think HIMARS are very helpful, and the more HIMARS with HIMAR ammunition that the Ukrainians have, the better. But the United States needs to increase HIMARS weapons production. Bradley have ammo shortage, just some particular types of ammo? Yes. It's just comparative to the other weapon systems that have ammo shortages, like artillery, it's not that comparable. But they do have some, just not in the same way. So let me just say quickly, the Senate GOP, Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, these guys are people who support Ukraine. And they've said they're going to get the aid to Ukraine and that the Republican Party will not abandon Ukraine. Well, the Senate GOP has just announced that they're going to block the border deal. The border deal that they negotiated, by the way, that Republican Senator Langford and others negotiated, and they originally requested in the first place. They said, even though the Senate GOP, from the math I've done, probably has the votes to pass it, they don't want to send it down to the House if it's going to fail. They don't want to embarrass House Republicans because they can't get their house in order, and Mike Johnson has no interest in agreeing to this deal because Trump wants to sink it. And so they're not even going to let it get a vote. They're going to block the border deal. They're going to not support it. And if this is the case, then it's not going to be able to get 60 votes in the Senate. And I don't even know if they're going to bring it forward for a vote. I want them to send it down to the House so we can have it on the record, that it was the House, it was House Republicans that sunk it. But I don't think the Republicans in the Senate want that on the record. Here's Mitch McConnell responding to a question about if it was Trump's opposition that was too much to overcome.
The president came out and he pointedly put the blame on Donald Trump. He said Donald Trump is to blame for the failure of this bill. Was Trump's opposition too much for you to overcome?
The answer to that question is yes, but here's what Mitch McConnell is about to say.
Well, I've said repeatedly he
just doesn't have control over his own party. I mean, Mitch McConnell's image, the amount of influence he used to have, it just looks like nothing. What can he do? I mean, he's the Senate Minority Leader, so it is true that he can't just make all the House do everything he wants. But you would think that like decades and decades and decades of experience would come with something.
I'm not going to get into comments about the race for the presidency among Republicans. I think in the end, even though the product was approved by the Border Council that endorsed President Trump, most of our members feel that we're not going to be able to make a law here.
By the way, can I just throw out there that the Border Patrol Union endorsed the plan? Let me repeat that. The Border Patrol Union endorsed the plan. Mike Johnson had to respond to that, and he said, oh, it was because of wage increases. Bullshit. Bullshit. It is true that they get wage increases, but when you read their message, they're talking about policy changes that is going to make it so they have less crossings. And they say it's going to make it better than the status quo. That was their statement. So Mike Johnson is not only like acting like a slimy salamander to us, he's also acting like a slimy salamander to the people on the ground who are actually dealing with issues on the border. The same union that endorsed Trump, by the way, which is why he's talking about it. Well, no, I think he said the Border Council. That's different, but still, they also endorsed Trump and are endorsing Biden and the Senate Republicans border deal. Well, no longer the Senate Republicans border deal. Now it's just Biden's border deal, I guess.
And if we're not going to be able to make a law, they're reluctant to go forward. There are other parts of this supplemental that are extremely important as well. Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. We still, in my view, ought to tackle the rest of it because it's important. See,
this is the thing that Mitch McConnell's been talking about before, and he said this like a few weeks ago, and he said, how about separating Israel aid, Ukraine aid, and all this other aid from the border deal, which is originally what Biden wanted to do back in fucking September, which if that is what ends up happening, I've said this before, thank God it would finally get passed, but that would mean that all of this performative nonsense was literally for nothing outside of the election, meaning that the people right now who are dying in Avdiivka due to a lack of ammunition shortage, just due to the ammunition shortage, was literally for nothing. That we could have lowered those casualty numbers for no reason outside of Trump wanting to, get fuck over Biden for the election.
The border isn't important, but we can't get an outcome. So that's where I think we ought to head. It's up to Senator Schumer to decide how to repackage this if, in fact, we don't go on to it.
But this is the problem. If the House Republicans are against sending, this is the problem. If we separate it again, this is what's going to happen. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. What's going to happen is once we separate it again, it's like, fine, okay, we'll pass everything individually. Then they're going to be like, No. You can't pass it individually. You need to tie it to reforms of the board. It's going to be something like that again. I shit you not. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And we're going to separate it. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, they're all going to stand up saying, no. Number one, we oppose it in all instances. But if you're going to do it, then you got to pass it this way. And then when we try to pass it this way, they're just going to fall back on point one again. And it's like, okay, we oppose it anyway, though. We're sinking it. It all just feels like a delaying tactic. See how long we can starve Ukraine of any aid.